This is the No Stroke Podcast with your co-hosts David Dancero and Michael Garrow, helping you to support and thrive in life after stroke. Their podcast is designed for educational and community support purposes only and should not replace medical treatment and guidance of your own health professional team.
Welcome to episode 45 of the No Stroke Podcast. I'm here with Michael Garrow, my co-host. A little different backdrop for you, Mike. Let's find you live at the International Stroke Conference after a busy couple of days, I bet. So tell us all about it, Mike.
Yeah, so got the opportunity. First off, want to say a big thank you to Pam Duncan and the team at Care Directions for really seeing the value of, having the patient and caregiver name as part of, what they do and really seeing that as an important aspect of this conference, right? And inviting me down to represent not only no stroke, but again, that patient and caregiver perspective. It's for my first experience here at ISC, it's kind of what I thought, right? A large scientific based conference where, research is being discussed and, leaders in neuro and stroke care are here to, learn from each other and, hopefully see, real things change, for delivery stroke. And it's, the AHA has done a brilliant job with, hosting this event. Again, the folks who are in attendance, some of the most influential people in stroke care. So I was able to run into our past guests, Jeff Redon and Stephen Davis from the Australian Stroke Alliance, and met some folks with the World Stroke Organization. So nice, to the point of an international stroke conference, great international flair for being represented. But to what you had similarly experienced, David, when you attended in LA, there's no voice of a caregiver or a patient here. And I get it. You're here to discuss science and late breaking, new research and ways to advance the field. But it always comes down to delivering better patient care, right? And until we have that voice represented here at a larger scale, where we have survivors on stage and caregivers on stage, I think that's what this is missing. So I'm happy that I was able to be here and experience it. And again, hopefully we have a slate of guests who are going to be on the show, again, because I've had this opportunity, but we need to do better. And I think if it's not the AHA to kind of push that agenda, I know they want to be a part of it and they advocate for the life after stroke aspect of care, and kind of that's part of their mission. But there's no doubt they need to do better. And if it's grassroots effort like ourselves and the likes of Pam and others who are passionate about this to actually get that voice heard, there's just going to be a missing gap until that happens.
Yeah, no, that's so true, Mike. And, I want to thank you for, sharing, what's, you're just digesting all this now. You're still there. The crowds have gone. You're wrapping up and you're getting ready to hop back on a plane and head back home. But first of all, thank you for, taking time away from your professional schedule to share in the experience of the event. And again, as you and I have talked, I've been there 3 times now, and every time I walk away with those same impressions.
It's not to say they don't care, right? It's not to say that it's not on top of every like a focal point on everyone's mind here, right? But it's delivering, it's getting these patients and caregivers here to be a part of the discussion. And you walk around the hall and you bump into people and you hear similar stories to ours, right? There's PTs who or OTs who've gotten into the profession, or neurologists who've become neurologists because of a experience with a loved one, right? Or, you know, everyone kind of has that understanding of, at the end of the day, it's that patient experience, right? That is what gets them out of bed every morning, and it's that delivery of care. And I was fortunate to attend lunch today with Lester Young and Kate Skeels from Tufts, and they're bringing a group around young stroke. And there's folks from Stanford Health, there's folks from University of Maryland. Like there's so many people. I think what I've gotten out of this is there's so many things happening in silos, right? And it's bringing that together, whether it's the neurologists who are and the providers who are interested in specific aspects, whether it's young stroke or transition of care, and in our case, kind of the advocacy efforts on the patient, or on the patient side and the caregiver side. We need to do better at getting those silos broken and getting more people rallied and learning from each other. And it's not only, granted, we have specific things from a US perspective with the way our healthcare model is framed that we need to consider, but there's so many learnings from other countries and things that we could leverage to advance the way that life after stroke or acute phase is handled. So yeah, it was eye-opening. Really, again, I'm fortunate that I was able to have the opportunity, and thankful to my CVS to have the ability to take time off and go travel for this. I think it relates to why I am at CVS and why I work on the products that I do, and have the ability to touch many lives. But at the end of the day, like what we're missing is that patient survivor voice. So I'm happy I was able to be here, experience it. But it's eye-opening for sure. So I think let's
I just want to add, before in the news, certainly, while we have this great backdrop of the American Heart Association behind you there, and as part of the ISC event, there was you received a really nice nomination between episodes here. So I want to personally, for folks who aren't aware, in all your efforts, they were acknowledged by the American AHA, right? I want to say that correctly, correct? For the
American. So thank you for that, David. And again, this couldn't have happened obviously without us, right? It's not a me award, it's an us award. My name might be on it because it's a caregiver award, but this wouldn't have happened without you. Like, we're a team where we're doing this together. So I was fortunate to receive a call from the American Heart Association who run the Stroke Heroes Award. And it's a award handed out to caregivers, survivors, and kind of community advocates that have really tried to push the needle on advocacy and make a change within stroke delivery and care. So it's an honor one to be nominated, and I fell under the Voters' Choice Awards. So voting for that is going to start March 8th. So hope all of our listeners will.
Absolutely. We're going to make sure we're going to keep you abreast on the pod here, when we direct you to how we can kind of do a full court press on that to make sure you push that over the line. So, and you've had a long day, so I'm happy to introduce our guest. If there is anything that we normally do a little bit more extensive in the news, but I think in the news was the fact that you're there. You made great connections. You probably got a big swag bag that you probably have more information. They probably have to sort out to decide what's going to make it back on the plane or not. But a lot of good conference materials, and I always like the exhibit hall. So I will definitely have to touch if there was any great tech on. Maybe you grab some cards and we can kind of talk through that on maybe the future episodes. But we're talking tech on this one. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was able to, to kind of move into that intro. Yeah, one of those companies that, we're here was Mind Maze, and
Perfect.
that's who, kind of made the connection into our guest today, David Putrino from the lab at Mount Sinai in New York. He's working with Mind Maze on a partnership that we'll dive into. So you could go back to our episode with Angela Green, who's a therapeutic integration manager with Mind Maze, moved in from an OT profession. And I met some of her colleagues here today who, again, same thing, kind of moved from the delivery end to now getting into digital therapeutics. But yeah, David Putrino, we're on a roll with Australian themes. We're keeping it going today.
Yep.
So he's a PT grew up in Western Australia, studied neuroscience in the University of Western Australia. He began his career as a clinician in Australia and then moved to the US to study computational neuroscience at Harvard Medical School, MIT, and NYU. He has served as a faculty member at Cornell Medicine, Burke Medical Research Institute, and now he's with Mount Sinai. And you'll hear him, as I phrased him, being the problem child. He's just done amazing work since he's been in there, and really took the mindset, and we'll cover it, of there's so many research folks who chase the government NIA funding, and he's kind of gone down the road of commercial. So yeah, again, we'll dive into stroke care. He kind of brings us on his personal journey of experiencing the patient side of things. And outside of Mount Sinai, I mean, he's just a very cool guy. I mean, he works with performance division at Red Bull. He works with this group called Not Impossible Labs, which do some super innovative rehab tech. And he works with the likes of the Nets and some high performance athletes as well. So,
folks,
he's no longer. Big other news. We got Kevin Durant, which we talked to. He's no longer in Brooklyn, over at Phoenix. Suns.
So folks, when you listen to this interview, Mike's going to press him about 3 times for a deeper dive into what's going on with that. But I think was I catching a little inkling? Are you trying to get into the lab to see if he can help you get out of retirement? Are you trying to make your way back on the court in some capacity? Is that,
I think I've hung it up for good.
All right. Well, he was whatever's happening there on the sports science side. He definitely, I think he handled it well. So, but but listen, I think we'll let's jump into this one because really timely. He's really, like you mentioned in his intro, he's kind of going after that 1% and that innovation, and a lot of the academia and the academic medical centers. Very comprehensive approach in terms of innovation and that patient perspective through the whole journey is really what I really appreciated it about the work he's doing. And again, we mentioned him in the same sentence with what they're doing at Shirley Ryan. So I feel like we'll jump right into this one, and hopefully Mike, you have a safe trip back, and I want to thank you for bringing us live there and on the end of a busy day for you. So thanks again for representing.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks to Pam Duncan and the team at Care Directions for making it happen.
Absolutely. All right. Enjoy this episode with David Putrino.
Welcome to the No Strokes podcast, David. It's great to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, we're super excited to have a chat with you. Where we were on a bit of a kick here with some Australian guests, and you're a removed Australian, been over here in the States for a few years. But let's go into your background. You heard you grew up in western parts of Australia and then got dragged over here to study something minor. I mean, we'll talk about it, but let's hear your background. You know, what brought you stateside?
Yeah, I mean, I was a physio back home in Australia, and uh, I was doing a lot of neuro rehab with all sorts of neurological patients. I was also just broadly interested. I was doing a lot of musculoskeletal work as well, to be honest. And uh, I just got very frustrated with the state of neuro rehab in that the rules tended to change based on the senior therapist at whichever hospital you were working at. It didn't seem to be based on the literature I was reading, or what may have been best practice. It was just, do what the boss tells you to do, and that's how you treat stroke patients, or that's how you treat spinal cord patients. So I went off and did a PhD in motor neuroscience, in working in animal models, trying to understand first just initiation and control of voluntary movement, and then what happens when a stroke occurs. How do those individual neuron activities change, and then what happens as recovery happens? Do we see changes in neural activity there and then as well? So it was really interesting. I kind of got bit by the research bug for sure, and that was when I was invited over to Boston to take a postdoc position. What kind of blows my mind, I swear I'm not trying to act like I'm not old, but what kind of blows my mind is that I was offered the position to move over to Boston in 2009, and neuroscience was such a new field at that time. It's kind of crazy to think about how you say neuroscience now, and almost everyone knows what you mean. In 2008, 2009, when you said neuroscience, people didn't really, the common public didn't really understand the term. I found myself often having to describe what neuroscience was as a term. It's a household term now. And I think it's also interesting to imagine that, back then we were doing brain recording experiments. We built our own electrodes because you couldn't, you could buy electrodes, but getting them shipped to Australia was an ordeal, and it was expensive and it was hard. And so we read a journal article about how to make your own sort of microelectrodes and implant them, and that's what we did. And then when we finally completed the experiments, I had all of this neural data we had collected, and there were all these computational neuroscientists in the US saying, "Oh wow, you've got neural data, come over. We don't have neural data, but we're building this whole concept of computational neuroscience." And I was a physio who had never written a line of code in my life, and I was, my PhD analysis was done in Excel. Again, I think this is aging me, but I want to insist that it wasn't that long ago. I moved over to Boston. I was really fortunate to work with Emery Brown out there, who's just an incredibly talented anesthesiologist, neuroscientist, and statistician. Full professor of medicine at Harvard, full professor of stats at MIT, and the chair of anesthesiology at MGH. So super impressive guy, ran an amazing lab. I worked with him for a couple of years and learned a lot. I like to say that when I was working with Emery, I never learned how to be a biostatistician or a computational neuroscientist, but I learned how to speak to one, which when I walked in, forget about it, that we were all speaking different languages. And when I walked out, I could at least have an intelligent conversation, which I think is really important for innovation, because if you can't do that, you just end up with people running in their own directions and not consulting one another. So that was a great experience for me. The experimentalist in me was getting a bit itchy at that point. 2 years of just running numbers was fun and a lot of learning, but I wanted to move on. So I moved to NYU and started doing some brain-computer interface work in large primate models. And again, it was really interesting. It was a challenging project. It was cool. I worked on it for about 3 or 4 years. It was DARPA funded, so really, bleeding edge stuff. But that was probably my second big crisis of faith in neuroscience. In that, when I hit the end of that project, the rest of the team that I was working with was so excited that we had hit the deliverables and that we'd done something that was curing paralysis. And I was the only clinician on the team, and I was kind of just horrified by that take. I was like, we haven't cured anything. We haven't done anything. We haven't fixed a person. We haven't fixed a monkey, that we didn't break first. It just, I started to realize this gap in translation that we were facing, where we say something on a paper that we've done something of great significance. We write on a grant that, the knowledge that we get here is going to be so important for those living with spinal cord injury and stroke and traumatic brain injury and all the rest. And yet this experiments are being conducted by people who've never been in a room with a patient, and they're being guided in a way that you can tell that these people have never been in a room with a patient, don't know how to scale a product to a clinical population, don't know how to work with clinicians. And so I saw an opportunity there, and I said, I left that lab and I went out to, you got to start your own lab, right, at some point. And so I was shopping around and I was offered a position at Cornell, and I said all of these things. I was like, I want to be this lab that's at the intersection of the cool neuroscience experiments, but then straight into clinical, intervention. And I don't think that the NIH is going to get us there. I don't want to write grants, and I don't, I want to work with industry. And it was funny because, Cornell, they yesed me to death. They were like, yes, we feel that way as well. And I literally, if you sign the contract on the document, and the cage came down, right? And they were like, just kidding, write grants, do incremental experiments, and and just, that's what you're supposed to do, academic, and leave everything else to the clinicians. And so it kind of made it work. I was writing grants and playing the game, but in the meantime, like, it was kind of like a guilty habit. Like, whenever I had free time, I'd run off and do like this hugely disruptive experiment, and they'd be like, what did you just do? Nothing. In fact, look, writing grants, don't worry about it. And then my current boss, Joe Herrera, gave me a call, and he had seen me speak at a presentation about innovation in rehab. And he's at Mount Sinai, where I'm sitting right now, at the Mount Sinai Hospital. And he said, look, I really loved your presentation, and we need more innovation here at Mount Sinai, and I want to give you a job. And I said to him, listen, you're an academic medical center, you're a big one, you're about the same as Cornell. I'm really, I'm unhappily married here at Cornell, but like, why would I divorce, move the family, just to be unhappily married at another big academic medical center? I don't believe it's going to be different, And he was like, look, I promise you it will be different. We are actively trying to be different. We're actively saying yes to innovation. Just come and interview and do your thing. And let's give it a go. And he was compelling. And I showed up, and that was 5 years ago, and Sinai has lived up to it. We started one center called the Abilities Research Center, which was focused on this intersection I was talking about, the idea that we take novel technologies and we accelerate them through all of these regulatory phases. We run pragmatic clinical trials. We have a clinic where, if the technology works, we make sure that it's in the clinic the next day as a treatment. and then we scale it to the larger Mount Sinai population, because we're 8 hospitals here in New York. So it's, once you can scale something, you can scale something. And, and over the last 5 years, we've gone from 1 center to 2 centers to 3. And this year we're opening up our 5th center. So, we've slowly been growing over time, and it's been really great to do it.
So you're a bit of the problem child then, huh? All these centers, they were
constantly.
Well, a problem child that, I appreciate you, the many points you made in that, but one of them, really around, researchers researching without kind of having that patient perspective, right? And actually being in the room with some of these, whether it's stroke, ALS, Parkinson's, whatever it might be, right? And it takes that patient experience, and that's what we like to bring in, from David as a survivor perspective and me as a caregiver here. When we speak to individuals like you, you've also had an experience, and if you don't mind kind of bringing us back to the Western Australian days of you growing up and, kind of letting the listeners know what you experienced and kind of how that molded your why for what you're doing right now.
Yeah, it's something I don't talk about a whole lot, just because I'm not sure in this case it was the biggest impact on my trajectory. I don't know if it's a coincidence or what, but yeah, I mean, when I was very young, I was 18 months old, I had a febrile seizure that led to me losing consciousness and stopping breathing, and I was rushed off to the hospital. So this was, mid 80s, a children's hospital somewhere in the middle of Western Australia. And, at that point, I was sort of blue in the face. I'd been unresponsive for a little while. They brought me back, and I had a sort of a dense hemiparesis on the left side of my body. And upon waking, the sort of attending neurologist in the hospital told my parents that I was paralyzed, told them that I wouldn't recover, which, again, thinking back on these things now, it's like some kid wakes up and 48 hours later you're telling their parents that there's, permanent paralysis. I'm glad we've come a long way from that. But my parents, who both they immigrated to Australia as one a teenager and one a young kid, didn't speak the language, didn't really get any education. So my dad, I think, finished the 7th grade. My mum finished 4th grade. And they took me home, and they were like, okay, left side isn't working, so everything goes on his left side. and that's it. That's gonna be rehab. And I was very fortunate. I acknowledge, now that I know what I know about brain recovery, I acknowledge that it probably wasn't just this old homey, rehabilitation that made everything come back. There was probably a lot of good fortune along the way. And, but I was very fortunate that, I feel as though I had a full recovery. And that's something that I do think back on a lot and ruminate on. Honestly, in terms of where my life has gone and where my career has gone, there was another accident that I had that I think probably shaped me more toward physical therapy. And it was actually when I was 16. I was playing Australian football, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen Australian football, but it's this beautiful combination of, I don't know, soccer and getting mugged in a street alley.
I lived in Ireland for a while, so it's kind of like a hurling type. They just go out and bash each other. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So I was a very big player of Australian football. Still am from time to time. You can find me on a field somewhere. But I broke my leg pretty badly, and was shuttled off to hospital, and I was at that point in my life in my high school, where they were sort of like, you need to choose what degree you're going to do next. And in Australia, you kind of jump straight into a professional degree. It's not like America where you do like 4 years of bachelor's and then you specialize where you want to go. It's like you go straight into med school or straight into PT or, wherever you want to end up. And I knew I wanted to do something in health, but I didn't actually, I was kind of like, oh, probably medicine. Everyone says medicine, and so there I am, like laying in hospital, and throughout it all, and it was a very bad break. So I was in hospital for quite some time, and then rehab for a while. And throughout it all, I had the image I had, it was the first time seeing the health system inside out in a way that I could remember, because I was, a teenager as opposed to a teenage monther. And all these doctors were running in and out, and they'd spend like a minute with me, da 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 da, and check off a few boxes and run off. There wasn't a real connection. There was just sort of like, there's the guy who operated on my leg, and and they were all busy, and the physios were the ones that got me better. The physios were like sporty and cool and like pushing me on and helping me to recover, and they were a legitimate part of the journey. I bonded with them all, and I liked them, and and they bonded with me. They got emotional when I walked for the first time, because it was such a bad break, and we were having non-union issues and all this all this stuff, and that was very formative for me. I was like, this is the relationship I want with my patients, like this is what I want to have. So I went and did physical therapy instead of or physiotherapy in Australia instead of medicine, because of that exact reason. I was like, this is what I want, and this is the rapport. I don't want to be the person who runs in, orders a few things, and runs out. And so that was a big moment in my life.
I didn't want to interrupt, but actually you saw that you actually some member of the healthcare team that actually spent more than 4 or 5 minutes with you at a time, right? That they actually were invested in hands-on. So that's and I just have to go back to your first encounter when you described your story as a young child. I actually was thinking that your parents actually had a really good understanding of the neuroscience, but they might not have had the formal training, but they knew they were going to get that left side to work. They were going to, make movement meaningful for you. So I just wanted to add that, but I appreciate you, sharing your background and what made you, want to take a deeper dive into the brain from these early experiences, and also with your foundation as a physio. I wanted to talk a little bit more, because what you were talking about on the patient engagement side and having patients along for that journey as you're innovating. What makes that unique at Mount Sinai? How early on in the discovery process do you bring them in with new innovation, and can you kind of describe that patient-centered experience that you guys embraced there?
Yeah, I mean, with everything that we do, we try to everything that we try to do is sort of just rooted in community co-design as a concept. So we think it's not always patients. Sometimes there are tools for clinicians we're evaluating. Sometimes there are tools for caregivers that we're evaluating. But no matter what we're doing, as early as humanly possible. Sometimes it's not always possible because of NDAs and other legal things that are in place, but as early as we possibly can, we're always trying to bring the population in to say, is this a good idea? Should we commit to this? Should we run a clinical trial on this? Should we get it done? So from the outset, we're asking our patients what we're doing. Most of our clinical centers, all but two actually, and not for want of trying, just because we're still working two of them out, to be honest. We have a lived experience advisory board where we bring on patients with the conditions that we're trying to treat. We bring on, and we talk to them about areas that we're targeting each year, and we're like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do next, and should we do it, or should we do something else? But we think that this area is worth going into. And you know, and then we talk about new services and how do we make people access these services more easily, and what can we do. And so everything that we do, as early as we can, we're talking to the end user, the person that it's intended to help. When we're designing the experiments, you know, we want to understand, like, pragmatically what our end users care about the most. If we can measure that, great. If we can't, no worries. When the experiment is over and we start to move into the phase of, let's say the technology goes well, and, you know, so the experiment's a success, we then move into the phase of, okay, we're going to adopt this in the clinic. It's going to be a technology that we have in the clinic that is now a clinical technology, not an experimental one. At that point, we bring the community back in and we say, okay, well, this is the real deal now. You know, there's one thing to show success in a trial where maybe someone's getting paid $50 or $100 or $200 to be in the trial, you know, and there's a lot of incentive, and you're kind of getting white glove service, you know, like there's a clinical coordinator telling you when all your appointments are and walking you through everything. Very stark difference when now it's a clinical product and you're a lot more on your own, and your insurance is getting billed for it. And, you know, the next step is going back to the community and going, okay, well, do you like it? Is this worth it? Are you actually using it? You know, going to our clinicians, is this a pain in the butt? Like, do you actually want to interact with this technology, or were you just smiling and nodding and gritting your teeth through the clinical trial phase because we were getting funded to do the clinical trial, but now you're like, I don't want to use it because it's my time. And that's, you know, it's very different from a clinical trial, but it's a very important information gathering stage because it tells us which technologies are going to do well and which technologies are just going to, you know, not going to scale. And it's all, the whole process needs to be community centered.
Yeah, I love the way you talk through that. And I think you, like, with given your background with cognitive neuroscience, right? Like, it's that understanding of the psychological aspect of neuroscience is kind of how I understand some of your work, right? It's that, you know, we often talk about behavior change, motivational interview, you know, kind of being a big part of life after stroke, right? And a lot of what you're doing from a lab perspective, I'm a product manager, and, you know, that's a big part of what I do, right? It's that early validation. You're getting users, you know, in the process early. And what I find interesting is, like, you guys are doing this both on the, you know, pre-trial kind of pre-commercial lens, but then and I listened to one of your talks where you know, you're really one of the only centers in the country, and another one that we had on from Shirley Ryan, Arun, in the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's a rock star. You know, where you're kind of taking more of this commercial lens. And one of the companies that we recently had on the podcast, MindMaze, I know you've recently partnered with here. So I'd love for you to, you know, speak about, you know, how that, I mean, obviously, you know, there could be, you know, NDAs and things that we can't go into, but at a high level, you know, what excites you about the opportunity of MindMaze and the technology of virtual reality for stroke patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that MindMaze is a technology that excites me because they've just had from the outset, they've just had a very good sort of mission and true north around what it might look like to create tele-rehab for stroke survivors. I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to stroke survivors and their ability to recover is just general dosage of therapy. We do so much. You know, we often evaluate so many of these clinical trials where a new technology will emerge, and we'll do, this randomized controlled trial where someone gets either standard of care or the new technology. And standard of care is more often than not, listed as, oh, you're going to get like an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, 3 days a week of upper extremity training. And then versus the new technology. And then more often than not, you see non-inferiority, versus the new technology. And I'm like, in what world is 1.5 hours a day of upper extremity training standard of care for any human being who has had a stroke in the United States, 3 days a week? That doesn't happen. But what we do see over and over again in clinical trials is it works well. And people, yeah. And so, and part of that is from stroke clinical trials. Part of that is from my work with high performance athletes, where I'm like, if you want to see behavioral change, you got to get them working so much, and you've got not only get them working hard and long hours, but doing things that are interesting, cognitively exciting, engaging, and keeping them coming back intrinsically, not just because someone's telling them to do it, but because they want it. I've for the longest time, I think it's no secret that I've been advocating for gamification as being a way to make that happen. And the mind maze technology is just great. It's comprehensive. It's something that can be deployed out to stroke survivors, and then they can start to get the dosage of therapy that they need. And they've just been a company that's also more on a policy side, really interested in working with us to start making sure that we can chase CPT codes that can reimburse for these sorts of things. It's not just about their technology, it's about making raising the bar for everybody, so that many of these technologies can be supported, because that's how you build an ecosystem, and that's how you make lasting impact. And we're always interested in supporting groups that are interested in disrupting the status quo.
Yeah, I think, you were spot on there. And, as we spoke with Angela, who leads therapy integration with Mind Maze here in the US, the ability for them, you could look at stroke rehab and in this space in general, right, where there's so much opportunity ahead, but, we're kind of at this intersection where we know it works in clinical trials, but we now need to prove and kind of get that efficacy and have the full cycle catch up, where reimbursement happens and more patients could actually get access to this amazing technology and rehab. So we're going to take a short break here. I think we're going to jump back into part 2 and dive into some exciting work around brain interface technology. So we'll be right back. Cool. All right. And we're back with David Putrino from Mount Sinai Ability Lab. We discussed, obviously your background, David, coming over to the States. You're kind of getting thrown into this research that you've been able to do for many years now, and you finally found yourself at a health system that's really empowering you to impact lives, work with some super interesting companies like Mind Maze, and you have your hands in a lot of different pies. One of them being the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, which I'm a basketball guy. I used to play. That was the reason I spent my time in Ireland. So maybe we could chat about that before this interview wraps up. But I want to touch on some work that you're doing with brain interface technology, and particularly a company based here in Brooklyn called Icahn. So bring us through that, because, just to kind of give you an example of, at least from what I've seen with this, so I'm a caregiver for my mother. My fiance's mom also had a stroke, right? And my fiance's mother is has issues with, she has aphasia. She has really bad spasticity in her left arm, hard for her to access technology, right? So we just tried to get her, and she's been able to manage, but get her into a virtual aphasia group. where she's able to connect in, but technology is really tough for her, right? And this is an example for many other stroke survivors and folks who've had neurological conditions. So I think the opportunity ahead for what you could kind of describe to us here that Synchron is doing is really game changing for ones that are close to my life, but again, many others out there. So bring us through this work and what it means for the future of folks who might be living with these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably I met Tom Oxley, who's the CEO of Synchron, probably I think 2011, 2012. I had mentioned I was at NYU and we were funded by DARPA to do some exciting brain-computer interface research. And DARPA, it's a Department of Defense funded, group, and they're really out there to chase the big ideas, the really risky moonshot ideas, and it's a very intense thing to have money from DARPA, because like every week you got to send them a report telling them what you're doing and how you're doing and are you on track. But also, it's a lot of money, so you do it. But you get to do exciting projects. And what struck me from meeting Tom was, you're in a room full of people who what everyone is doing is crazy. There's not a single person there that's not doing something that's pretty out there. But Tom was by far the craziest of the group, so it was, everyone else was doing brain-computer interface work the traditional way, sticking electrodes into brains, and Tom was saying, no, we're going to go through the blood vessel, and we're going to get close enough to the brain to be able to record brain activity, but we're not going to have to open the skull, we're not going to have to, do any of these things. And it was really interesting, because I think I mentioned that I was the only clinician on my team. So I was, the clinician in me was like, this is amazing. This is minimally invasive. This is, I saw all of the pros. And I was on a team of engineers, and they were like, no, the signal quality is going to be bad. And you're going to get so much noise from the blood, going through the blood vessel, and all the negatives. And I kind of, I met Tom a couple of times. I liked him. I kind of forgot about him for about a decade. And then I joined the team at Mount Sinai. And sure enough, 10 years later, I just bump into Tom, and he's a neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai, and an interventional neurologist at Mount Sinai, working in the neurosurgery department. And I catch up with him, and he's like, hey, we're about to start first in human trials. And I was like, who's running the trial? And he's like, actually, I don't know. I can't get anyone invested in this. Like, everyone's telling me it's going to be too many problems. And I was like, bring it on down to my lab. We'll definitely do this with you.
Problem child coming for it.
Well, yeah. But see, what's crazy is the difference between some of my past jobs versus the new job was, I would come to like past bosses with an idea like this, and they'll be like, no, too risky. I come to my present boss, Joe Herrera, and he's like, yeah, do it tomorrow. And I'm like, I'm the one putting on the brakes. I resent that he has put me in this position where I'm the guy being like, wait, maybe we should hold back on this a little bit. But that's where I'm at. That's my life now. I'm the responsible one. But we threw a few ideas around, and we were getting things going, and we were fortunate enough to win some NIH funding to support the first in human trial, which is ongoing now. And it's a very, this is an invasive technology, and so right now we're at a phase of safety feasibility, meaning we're going to implant these devices. We want to make sure that it's safe, so that someone can tolerate this technology for a long period of time. We want to make sure that it's feasible, meaning that over time, the recording, the signal still works, the devices work, all of those pragmatic things. And then in the next set of clinical trials, we'll go on to, okay, how well does this work and how useful is it, and so on and so forth. But you know, we've gotten going with the technology. We've implanted 3 people in this clinical trial so far. The technology, like I mentioned, it's very unique. So while other brain-computer interface technologies require you to open the skull, implant something directly into the brain, and then close the skull, and often you have a little socket on the outside of your body that you need to plug in. This technology enters the body through the jugular vein. So a surgeon that's used to doing endovascular procedures will thread a little wire through the jugular vein into another vessel, which is called the superior sagittal sinus, which is a big vein that kind of sits between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And when it gets to the level of the motor cortex, which is kind of in the middle of the head, the neurosurgeon opens up the stent, and it's sort of this little cylindrical mesh sits on the inside of the blood vessel. Now, this mesh has electrodes on it, and so the mesh eventually over time heals into the blood vessel, and then there's just a wire that goes back down you know, the vessel from where it came, and plugs into a little pacemaker-like device that sits on the upper part of the chest. And so the whole system is completely internal. You don't see anything on the outside. And then once you're ready to go, once you're out of the hospital, you know, and it's usually a procedure. The patient comes in, they spend 2 days in the hospital, and then they go home, which is extraordinary. Once the patient's ready to start training, we take a device that kind of looks like a cell phone. You pop it over the skin where you know that the internal device is, and they communicate via Bluetooth to send brain activity to a computer that then goes on to sort of control the system. So the initial technology is used as a communication technology. So like I mentioned, these electrodes, they sort of sit in the brain right near what we call the primary motor cortex. So if I think about wiggling my left foot, it can pick up that impulse. And over time, with the machine learning algorithms that are being applied, it can start to identify with very good accuracy, okay, this person's trying to wiggle their left foot. So let's assign a control signal to that attempt to wiggle their left foot. So, you know, maybe you want that to be left click of the mouse. Now they're trying to wiggle their right foot. That can be right click of the mouse. Now they're trying to do, you know, something else. That can be, you know, open and close a hand is one that we've been using with patients. That's a zoom and click. And so you map on all of these different functions to different movement attempts. And eventually we get to a point where the patient is able to control a cursor with a very special control system where there's kind of an arrow sort of moving around the dial. And when the patient clicks, the cursor starts to move in that direction. And then they can click to stop it. And then they can click on an icon. And so over time, the patient gets really skilled at this. You know, one of our patients, for instance, was able to open up an email, open up Gmail and send off an email that said hi to his primary caregiver that's living in the house inside of 3 minutes, controlling lights and, you know, and devices in the house through a control system on the screen. Obviously using it for communication, similar to, you know, an eye gaze system or something of that nature. Opening up a Zoom, you know, so all of these little, we call them digital ADLs, digital activities of daily living, that allow someone who is otherwise completely locked in to have digital control of it, cognitive control of a digital device.
Fascinating. Returning independence in many ways. Just to small tasks like that are monumental for someone to bring back their quality of life. Wow. In the average week, after hearing your story, I'm not sure. I used to say, I said previous interview with Dr. J. Rahman at Shirley Ryan, I said, I want his job. Now I want your job too. So it's really cool stuff.
Sounds a bit risky to me. I don't know.
Not for a
Yeah.
problem child, Mike.
No, true. So I assume this is your work with the nets, right? So you've been able to simulate Kevin Durant's mind to be able to shoot 95% from the free throw line with this.
No comment. I can't take questions on
that. So, you've talked through revolutionary work, David. And it's, again, like similar to what David was saying when we finished up the interview with Dr. J. Rahman, like, it's amazing. It's really, opportunistic for folks who are listening in the stroke community to know that they have people like yourselves really leading the charge here with some of the kind of trailblazing efforts that are happening, from clinical trial perspective, but also your work, to get some of these devices into the hands of patients and reimburse. So thinking through that whole process, you've also, have within this lab, you have a few different projects. I don't know, is there anything else you want to touch on? I know, we definitely want to get to your book that you've written and, kind of how you think through this design process for digital health and digital therapeutics. So yeah, I'll leave it. If there's anything else you want to touch on from the lab perspective, or we could just jump into the book.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
so you could talk all day on the left.
Yeah, I mean, we at any one time we've got 20, 30 clinical trials running out of the lab, and I mean, some of the things that I'm particularly interested in that we have coming in the pipeline this year, and it is we're doing a lot of work with implantable technology for stroke recovery. So we're deeply looking into vagus nerve stimulation for upper extremity recovery. We're impressed by what we're seeing so far, and we hope to continue that work. And I know that there's a lot of eyes on that. But again, it was one of these things where we saw a randomized controlled trial. It worked out pretty well. Okay, let's offer it here. Let's see how it goes. Let's see what patients feel about it. Let's, hang on to our patients and make sure that they feel as though it was worthwhile for them. We're really trying to accelerate some initial clinical trials into epidural spinal stimulation as well for upper extremity recovery and stroke. Again, some really impressive work by Doug Weber and John Krakauer out in Pittsburgh that was just published, in Nature Medicine, showing some very impressive outcomes in epidural spinal stimulation. So, we're running in that direction, and we have some clinical trials coming up. And we're just, in general, one of the things that we're really trying to push for is running clinical trials on interventions that restore function, as opposed to teaching people to live with the function that they have. So compensation versus restoration. And we are all about compensation if it improves overall function, and we're all about pushing people to the limit of working with what they've got. But then, and that's what we do. That's our rehab, go for it. But now we're getting very excited about technologies that might be able to unlock new function and reduce, very authentically reduce disability. And so some of these implantable tech approaches really have our interest right now, and we just want to get to the bottom of it. We're not pro or against. We just want to see if it works and tell the community as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and it is special. So are there ongoing clinical trials that folks could kind of reach out to the lab and get involved in, or how could people learn a bit more about
Yeah,
what you have going
absolutely.
on?
If they Google Abilities Research Center at Mount Sinai, like I said, there's a lot. I'm not going to torture everyone by rattling
Yeah.
them off, but if they Google Abilities Research Center at Mount Sinai, there's a whole list of clinical trials that we're currently recruiting for, and people can always just email abilitiesresearchcenter@mountsinai.org and just say, hey, I've had a stroke or I have Parkinson's. Have you got anything going on? Or I don't know why I just said those two, but just tell us who you are and tell us what you're interested in, and we can see if we can fit a clinical trial.
Awesome. And it, obviously being proximity to New York would be great, but do you guys offer telehealth stuff as well?
Yeah. We've got a few trials that involve more far-reaching interventions as well. Yeah.
Awesome. So, we have two Davids here today. Two Davids being a lot of similarities. One being you have background in PT, which I know, David has a passion for, and you also are both authors. So I'm the only non-author here at the table. Maybe that'll change one day, but bring us through Hacking Health and the book that you've released, and again, as you've spoke today, it's one I want to pick up and read because I think you're a perfect man to think about designing digital health solutions. So bring us through it.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think that David said that he wants my job, and I would be happy to give David my job. I want to retire, but but what I would much prefer is that that we start placing all sorts of Davids in locations all around the country, because what I really firmly believe is the fact that we've fallen into this risk-averse hole where the NIH does its best, but it's got a limited pot of money. It only funds incremental research, and so it takes us 20 years to get anything good for patients. But there's a whole lot of gravitas associated with getting this NIH research money, right? There's a whole lot of, they got NIH money and it contributes to your university's rankings and, all of these things. And so people chase it. And so, one of the things that I was really sort of gobsmacked by was how much money there was in industry that was just being wasted, like terribly wasted, because academic medical institutions wouldn't partner with industry. They were just like, no, we all want to scramble for this one little pot of NIH money, which will only, our research will only kick the can down the road this much. And they're ignoring these groups that could be supporting highly disruptive innovation that could really benefit patients. Just because they didn't know how, they don't know how to interact with industry. It's just kind of foreign. And B, because they're like, no, the university wants me to get this NIH money, not this industry money. And, like that really bothered me, not because I believe in incremental research. I think it's really important. I think that it has its place, and we have a lot of incredible discoveries because people did the incremental work to get there. But I also think that what we've done is, because we're risk averse financially, we've skewed in the wrong direction. So we've, rather than have a balance of let's do 50% moonshot, crazy disruptive, interesting, exciting, actually could help a patient tomorrow research, and let's do 50% incremental, where 99% risk-averse incremental, and we're 1% disruptive. And so I really, what I want to do, and I did it with Hacking Health I kind of read Hacking Health now and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. It was so long ago. But, maybe it's time for a second edition, but but also, who wants to write a second edition? So, but what I wanted to do with that book was be like, here's a how-to guide. Here's a quick, don't be afraid of industry, and also industry, don't be afraid of academia. You guys should meet and pick up this book, read this book, and go and start your own abilities research center. Because believe me, with as you mentioned, like everyone else chasing NIH money, and there's 2 of us in the country chasing industry money. There's enough, there's enough for everybody. There's enough for thousands of people to be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and you look at
Truly.
It's that full cycle, right? Like you look at digital health, digital therapeutics market that got billions of dollars of funding over the last decade. From a VC perspective, these companies go build products that they try to then put into the market. We need the clinical evidence. They try to go work with these hospitals it's that cycle that just needs change. And, again, people like yourself and Dr. Arun to be able to bring this full circle is important. And yeah, hopefully we can clone you and bring you into other places across the country, because you're not going to do it all yourself.
No one needs more me. Just clone the approach. That's enough. But and I think the most important thing is our patients deserve it. I can't fathom having to wait 17 years for a cure, and I think that this is why it's so important to have community co-design, because I can't get away with anything when a patient advisory board wanders in and looks at me and is like, all right, well, what the fuck have you done? What are you doing? What's next? If I don't have answers, I feel like an idiot, and I should, because what have I done for them lately? And what is in the pipeline? And does your arm work yet? No. Okay. Well, what am I going to do? That is the urgency. That is the attitude that we could be feeling. No one faults me for their disability. No one says, this is all your fault that I'm still disabled. But but in the same breath, they see me trying, and I don't see a lot of other people trying this hard to solve it tomorrow. And I think that if you had a person with the condition in the room saying, hey, remember me, I'm still here.
Yeah.
What's next?
David, I think
that's the key.
I think, David, you just answered the magic wand question right there as part of it. Honestly, you're bringing it full circle. You're bringing it to respond to the patient. And I've seen this so many times where we invest and we ask so much of them early on in the process, in that early discovery. And then, you mentioned too, on the clinician side, we don't see if it's going to fit into the workflow so that it can get to the patient, but we don't follow up and give the patient the final word. I don't know if that's the right way to say, but is this going to work for you and your lifestyle? And so we always wrap up with that magic wand. So I guess under the rehab lens, there's so much that we talked about today. We always ask, if we handed you a magic wand, how would you redesign or change the stroke care pathway? And that can be on the reimbursement side, that can be the outcome side. I know it's a sort of a loaded question, but what do you think that it would take?
Well, no, I mean, if it's a real magic wand, it's really magic. If it's a real magic wand,
we don't have a sponsor yet, so our magic wand is really in its infancy, but it's a real magic wand. Pretend.
I think one of the wisest things that I ever heard was someone I worked with who grew up had a tough upbringing and grew up in a tough spot, and they said, one thing I wish was that every person who is a candidate to become president of the United States, I wish that they could just live for a year living minimum wage, and that you had to get through that gauntlet to be able to become president of the United States. And if I had a magic wand, I would want every person, every so-called stroke researcher or clinician, you got to live a year. either caring for a person with a stroke or understanding, living the symptoms of a stroke, understanding what it is to live inside the body of a stroke. Like, that's what we need, that level of empathy and that level of lived experience in all of our researchers and clinicians, because we're not there, and we're not even close. We're teaching the opposite. We're teaching, don't have empathy, don't have an understanding, just follow the science, keep emotion out of it. And if I could instill that in every person, watch how much more quickly the research would go if you could just make that small shift in perspective.
I'll say it. That was the best magic wand answer yet. Honestly, like, you couldn't speak truer words. And I think every listener can't argue what you just said. You're not moving a mountain. You're not, trying to say everyone could get a mind maze in the home that costs, however much money you're saying, but it's, and hopefully everyone will get a mind maze in their home, but it's that passion, that spark with that David and I, and you yourself from, a young age, like it takes that motivation to move mountains, like, and I think, you carry that with you, even though, we're speaking to stroke here, but I know deep down, like, you have that intrinsic motivation, how to speak to a patient and have the empathy. So yeah, well said.
Keep going after that 1%, David. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Will do.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. We'd love to have you back on. It's been an excellent conversation. We still need to talk about Kevin Durant's brain simulation.
Sounds good.
All right, David.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
I loved it.
Thank you. Good night.